Hello and welcome to the Thinking Cap Solutions podcast, talking everything content, audience engagement and leadership. My name is Corey Kay, as he is every episode. Hello to Mickey Barr.
That's me.
Mate, the last episode, emotional intelligence, I knew it was going to bite me, and it did.
What happened?
So I was out with a bunch of mates, and as you do, throwing a bit of banter, throwing a bit of shade around. I got a bit of, that's not real good emotional intelligence, Corey. You hurt my feelings.
You can have a sense of humour and a bit of banter with your mates and still have emotional intelligence. You should tell them, mate, come on.
That's exactly what I said, mate, as the banter continued. But no, it was a good chat. In all seriousness, emotional intelligence in the workplace is super, super critical. So if you're interested, please go and have a listen to that episode. But today's episode, we've been sitting on the sidelines on this one, and two mediums that we are both passionate about and see futures in both, and that is podcasting via radio. Radio's dead. You've got to be in podcasting now to stay relevant.
Well, I mean, in our 30 years in media, mate, my take on it when that kind of stuff was bantered around was quite defensive. Now that you and I have sort of been out of commercial radio industry, apart from working with some clients in the commercial radio landscape, far more objective and as you say, a little bit more humorous. And humorous because it's such a ridiculous thing to try and play the two off against each other. I mean, come on. Both can and should and do coexist. The similarities are it's about people who can tell great stories, great content curation and building an audience. And there's a few other similarities, but beyond that, the business models are dramatically different. So trying to compete them, put them against each other is so ridiculous. And then let's just as a side, they've been trying to say that radio is dead for years. If you go back to 1979, when most of our audience probably wasn't even born then, Buggles had a song out, Video Killed the Radio Star, which was inspired by that kind of headlines that were going around back then. And you know what? Radio has survived video. It has survived the Walkman, the Discman, the bloody iPod, and it will absolutely continue to thrive through the world of podcasting. Why? Because they both have a role to play. They're slightly different role, even though there are some similarities.
And let's just start with the radio's dead part. I read that, and then you start looking at numbers. And if you want to go and Google and have a look at, when we're talking Australian radio industry, although I imagine it'd be worldwide, it's got its challenges. And we're seeing redundancies, we're seeing share prices which aren't ideal. But look at the audience. And we're seeing the audience grow in commercial radio.
You can either be glass half empty or glass half full. And I look to glass half full. And if you look at the GfK data, and GfK is the company that runs the Australian radio surveys, and their year-on-year data shows that the growth of audiences listening to commercial radio continues year-on-year to improve. And then to back that up, there was a study results came out only a couple of weeks ago from the infinite dial test, and that's been happening every year for I think about 9 years now in Australia. It's done by Edison Research, which is a US-based company, and they've been doing similar surveys for a long, long time in America. And it basically looks at listener and consumption habits of commercial radio, podcasting, smart speakers, and the likes. And that data showed that, in particular, in the money-making age demographic of 25-54s, the audience growth is up 6.5%. Now, podcasting in the same demo is up about 8%. Both of them growing. Podcasting slightly more. You'd expect that. It's the newer kid on the block, but both are growing. Isn't that a good thing? So one is not cannibalizing the other. They're both growing.
This episode, we'll talk a bit of business model. We'll talk the listening habits, which are fundamentally different between the two, which means you've got two different style guides and two different ways that you execute. Strategy mistakes, which I think can happen between the mediums, and also the wins that can happen, and the learnings from radio to podcasting and podcasting to radio are pretty obvious as well. So let's just start with the business model, Mickey.
Yeah, look, in its simplest form, commercial radio is exactly what it says on the label. It's commercially focused radio designed to create content that attracts the biggest audience possible, so then you can monetize that, commercialize that. So with that comes certain guidelines to the kind of people and the kind of content that will have mass appeal. Doesn't make sense, and it wouldn't be a smart business model to be super narrow in commercial radio land and expect that you're going to create a mass audience and then create mass monetization of that. Where you look at the podcasting world, it's not necessarily designed for mass appeal. Now, there's podcasters out there that have got huge audiences, but they start from a really narrow focus, very clear, defined product definition, type of content that they want to create, the type of audience that they want to attract. And that's how they can make smart money. So very, very different business models. One's designed to be a bit more niche, and very narrowed in, where commercial radio is designed, let's be as broad as we can to get as much people as we can to make as much money as we can.
I think in this whole argument, everyone's lost sight of the fact that the more audio solutions there are and the more opportunities that exist, the better. If you don't want to move into commercial radio, I want to run my own race, I don't want to have to work with other people, or you look at it like, I want the resources, I want to get to a bigger audience, why would you create a divide or an us and them between the two?
We're seeing it happen a lot where it's successful for those that actually want to move between the two, across the two. And equally, those be hyper successful without the other. It doesn't have to be black and white. It doesn't have to be one or the other. The two can coexist and both can learn from it. And, commercial radio are actually being quite smart in that place. If you look at SCA, who we used to work for, investing in podcasts with their listener platform that houses their radio products and their podcasting products, ARN with iHeart and the partnership that they do. They're not seeing it as it's one or the other. They're seeing it's all part of our audio solution, audio first strategy. And it's a smart way of thinking, because you're not cannibalizing your audience. Neither are necessarily exclusive. While there are small pockets of people out there that will only consume podcasts and not commercial radio, and vice versa, what we're actually seeing more and more now, the consumption of both is significantly growing. And in fact, I think the infinite dial test, it might have had the number up as high as past 90% of Australians listen to commercial radio and podcasting. They can coexist.
Can you talk through passive versus intentional, podcasting versus commercial radio listening?
Yeah, well, radio is very passive, very habitual. So if you think about it, in today's world, most people that are consuming radio, it's in car. In fact, the infinite dial data says that radio is still the number one consumed audio in cars. Clear number one, then it's music streaming, and then a distant third is podcasting. And you'll typically listen at the same time when you're driving to work, on the way home from work, and typically commercial radio build their model around this to go, okay, we know people when they're in the car, and so we will do the same kind of thing at the same time every day to try and bring in that audience to go, I need to listen to this radio station at this time because they do the big $10,000 giveaway every day, and it's great listening, or whatever it might be. Podcasting is very different. It's typically, emotional driven or informative driven. You've got the flexibility to when and where you listen, where radio is live and immediate. Podcasting, typically you can consume it at your convenience, anywhere, anytime. So that can be when you're out doing your exercise, going to bed, doing the washing, whatever you want. And it's typically more one-on-one. It's very, put the headphones on in most cases, unless you're at home alone and you can put it on the smart speaker. But most time it's headphones in and having it listen. So
the two do fundamentally similar things, but also very different at the same time and have absolute benefits. The job of radio at 7:40 is very different to what it does at 8 o'clock at night when I'm listening to Joe Rogan walking my dog, but both have immense power. Let's talk talent movement, Mickey, because I think that's a fairly good barometer on where these two worlds are at. Now, if everyone was leaving radio to do podcasting, that'd tell you a story. And if everyone was leaving podcasting to do radio, that'd tell you another story. And we're seeing both.
Again, it's not black or white here. Some of the biggest consumed podcasts in Australia are actually radio catch-up podcasts. You think Hamish and Andy, Kyle and Jackie O, to name a couple there. We have seen, great talent like Abby Chatfield move from a, podcasting space into radio and then, back into focusing heavily more on the podcast space and do it very well, transition exceptionally well. Hamish and Andy actually were one. I mean, they were renowned as a radio show and then took that same model and moved it purely into a podcast space. They pretty much don't do radio anymore. And it's one of the most successful podcasts in podcasting Australian history.
We're also seeing podcasters that are moving into the radio space. So the 3 p.m. pickup is Life Uncut. That's a podcast that now is doing radio. Lou and Jarch, who are the latest.
So just hired them, right?
Yeah. So I've been listening to them for the last 18 months and just love what they do. And actually thinking, I wonder who's working with these guys, because they seem to have some really nice sensibilities. As it turns out, Lou's former radio producer. I actually had to listen to a podcast with Mark Boris, and they're both being interviewed. This is just before they launched on Triple M. I think Jarch has come from this. The beautiful thing about him, I think he is not what I'd call radioified, whereas Lou's got some background and she talked around the structure. So she's clearly the producer who's got the structure of the show, and he loves the fact that he can just do whatever he wants inside of her structure. And he go, I'll let her do it wherever I need to turn up and whatever I need to say. And that is a wonderful example of complementary skills that have been for the benefit of podcasting. Now they're on radio. There's going to be a different set of skills that now I imagine Jarch is going to develop, which is going to benefit his podcasting. Like, I actually see the two potentially feeding into each other, but make no mistake, two different disciplines, right?
I mean, it's too early days to see if the transition is successful from a commercialization point of view and from a radio ratings point of view, but based on ears, to your point, it's sounding pretty strong, right? But the challenge with that comes is the risk of management trying to commercial radio too much, but equally being too resistant to actually, how do we stay true to what we are, but also understand the type of audience we're after here is somewhat slightly different.
I really want to talk about this. I think this is the crux of the argument. So those in the podcasting camp and the excitement of being nimble, being able to control your own destiny, not have anyone telling you what to do, I absolutely see the benefit of that. Also, I think it can slow you down to not get feedback and not have someone have you grow. I think your podcast could, rather than take 3 years to cut through, could take less if you've got the right people behind you. But because I'll give you an example, and I look at Lou and Jarch, and I feel because they've got a really strong partnership and she's got a background in radio, and I'd like to think the people around that show understand the essence given they've listened to the podcast. But I'll give you an example of what this radioifying of talent. A contestant came out of Big Brother, was in a commercial radio show, and I had a listen out of professional curiosity, and I was just blown away with what I heard, purely because it was different. It was fresh, the turn of phrase, the way they would actually go about the craft of doing radio was very different. They had a segment, it was a debate segment, and I remember I used to listen to it all the time. And this performer would be outstanding. Anyway, I caught up with their boss, tell me all about it. What's the process? The debate writes it on a napkin 2 minutes before the song finishes. Now, what happened over the course of the next few weeks, I listened to the segment and something wasn't quite the same. It started to sound processy. The magic was gone for me. And what they'd done with this particular performer, I need you to prepare this the night before. And what happened to the performance is it wasn't in the moment. And this is the mistake that can be made. If it works for this performer to write that debate on a napkin and they get a great performance, rather than being well prepped out and well thought and researched, let them do the napkin.
Absolutely. And that's what we talk around individualized leadership, knowing your people, knowing how to get the best out of them. And it's not a one size fits all. It's not a sausage factory. So in that instance, if that's how they work best on the fly, and let's judge it on the outcome, judge it on the output and what you hear, not so much on the process. Because everyone's process might be different to get their best out of it. And that's right. And that's why, to me, again, the argument's not radio's the issue, it's the leadership's the issue in that instance. So let's not put a blanket over the whole industry and go, well, the industry is the problem. Because back to what I talked about earlier, the business model for commercial radio is build as much audience as you can to monetize it. So there is some guidelines that come with that. And let's be clear, guidelines to work within. But then there needs to be flexibility to allow the performers to be the best they can. Now, not everyone's had that same experience. I get it. But let's not throw the blanket over everyone and go, well, radio's the problem. Because that is an element and criteria of what has been successful for a long time with commercial radio. And if you try and take a podcast approach and put it on radio, it will fail. And very similarly, if you try and take a pure radio product and put it on podcasting, it will fail. Process is not the same. The audience habits are not the same.
Another point that's come up, and again around commercial radio, and they want to control you, and we've been in these meetings before where we do set up meetings of shows. And I think this is where it gets misconstrued that people are put in a boardroom in front of a whiteboard and told who they need to be, and you have an agenda of who you want that person to be. And I think we need some clarity around what that actually means, Mickey, because on the surface, it does look like that you are controlling the person and making them turn them into someone they're not. But that's not what those sessions run well. and run with an inclusive mindset and collaboratively, that's not the point of them, right?
The intent there is to all be on the same page and extract the qualities and personality traits of an individual to identify what is their role and the areas to play on the radio. Because let's be honest, there's elements probably in most people's personality that you go publicly, that may not be the best to showcase that. That's not telling you not to be someone you're not. It's just simply going, okay, if our job is to attract the greatest audience and we believe you're the best person for that, tell me about yourself and what are those things that are important to you and of interest to you. And hopefully, as you say, if it's done right, it's the team's responsibility to work with you to go, yeah, there's something in that. Absolutely lean into that. Yeah, we can play in that space. The worst thing you can do is to say to someone, well, that might be who you are, but no, don't go there. That's not the job. And for some people, that may have been their experience, but that's an individualized situation. That's not a blanket. That's the problem. And that's smart business from commercial radio. Again, what's the objective? As much audience as possible, monetize the thing. So experienced people running those meetings and working with people are there to help you and to amplify the best in you that's going to attract the best audience for you.
And commercial radio is really well resourced. And I find it strange to think that there's an opinion out there that the more time we spend talking about what we're passionate about, we want to minimize those conversations. We don't want to get in a room together and start to work through how can we be better? What can we do to attract an audience? Like the more conversations, I know anything that I want to be good at, improve, if I want it to be my livelihood, the more that I'm working on it with people, the better, surely.
Many minds, smart minds can make great outcomes, right? And while I'd love to name names, not to shame anyone, but just to give greater context, I won't. But I know some people that have been fantastic broadcasters for a long period of time. When it started to fade away from them was when they started to believe their own hype and started to disengage from the broader team around everything from planning to getting that constructive, objective feedback from experienced people that can help guide them. As I said, I'd love to name them to give you the context, but I just don't think that's appropriate. But there's so many of them, big, high names that are no longer there. And in large, it's because they stepped away from the model that got them there in the first place, which was you be you, but you're nothing without the other people around you as well that can help you, guide you, give you that feedback and help you grow and keep you on point. And that's the great thing about commercial radio, as you say. I mean, it's not as well resourced as it was, but it is still far well resourced compared to typically the podcast world, unless you're Joe Rogan and have got hundreds of millions of dollars to put the right support around you, where sometimes you're a one-man band or a two-person band. But that doesn't mean you can't be successful there as well. But again, you've got to understand the power of the two mediums.
Can we go through what each can learn from each other? So let's just flip it around. What podcasters can learn from radio pros who come in, and conversely, radio people learn from podcasters. So let's start with podcasters. What can they benefit from and learn from someone in radio to make their product better?
Understanding and identifying an audience. Who are we trying to target? Why will they care? How can we make them care around what we want to talk about? I think commercial radio done well at its best really understands who their audience is and what's going to move the needle to really engage an audience. So I think that there's a power there. There's words we use in commercial radio land around benchmarking or segmentation and understanding what are those things that we can do that we become famous for that the audience love. And then, because when you become famous for them, it becomes top of mind, and that's a really powerful thing. And typically the great podcasts follow the right formula and do a similar thing. They know segments and benchmarking elements of their podcast that will attract an audience that they become renowned for and people come back to do. So that's really important. Things around sound quality. You know, it sounds simple, but quality of not just the content, but the quality of the audio, those kind of things. Because, you know, how many podcasts have we listened to where, you know, it sounds like it's on a bloody AM transistor radio? It's not. It's those fundamentals, which it's got a limited time shelf. It's like that because people won't tolerate that over a period of time. And then there's consistency and repetition. So again, be consistent to what you want to do. And that's relevant in radio and it's relevant in podcasting. You've got to be consistent. You can't be a podcast that starts out in 1 minute, you're taking one approach, and then 3 episodes later, you're going, nah, we're pivoting and we're trying to be a funny podcast 2 episodes ago. Now we're going to go super serious. Unless you've got it under the greater context that we do these different things and we're going to shift our moods. And again, you become consistent around that. That's really important. So I think that's some of the key things that you can learn from radio and really put you in really good stead for podcasting.
Reminds me so much of the work we're doing with the podcast at the moment, and it's around something that's really raw but has some X factor to it. We are talking about podcasts that are on the rise, not ones that have already built their audience and know exactly who they are. We're talking about the fast tracking of podcasters with the benefit of radio. And I hope that radio is embracing it, but there are so many great, wonderful lessons to learn from podcasters.
It was a strength of commercial radio, but it seems somewhat less of it now, which I think is problematic. But the ability to show true vulnerability, the great art of storytelling and showcasing your personality and the luxury you've got in podcasting world, it's typically long form as well, right? And when I say long form, let that be a 10-minute episode or a 60-minute episode of podcast. That's long form when you look at compared to commercial radio, where they typically work off a business model of anywhere from 2 to 3.5 minutes type to tell your story, get in, get out. So it's very different. The challenge with that from a commercial radio point of view is it's become somewhat of a lost art, where the art of gaining the audience straight away from the first thing you do to set them up with the story, and then how do you keep them hanging in there and then keep them to the end and getting out on a high point, where podcasting, because I guess you've got a little bit more time, you've got the ability to really tell the story in a lot more detail. So radio can learn that that's still a really important role. The thing is, how do they adapt that to the time guidelines that work best for commercial radio? Because, Kyle and Jackie O are probably the only exception, but most commercial stations, if you try to get on the air and do a 15-minute talk break, you would have lost the audience within the first 5 minutes, no matter how good the story is, because that's just the nature of how I consume it. And again, that's the differentiations, but that's a learning, I think.
If there's one big lesson, I think, for commercial radio, finding people who already have a friendship. How many shows have we built? And some of them you get away with and some of them you just don't, where this person fits this role, this person fits, and then bring them all together. Hamish and Andy, to me, almost are the original podcasting model of there's 2 mates who ended up on radio. And for some reason there has been others that have followed, but not many. Mainly they've been recreated. But in the podcasting world, it's people who have a friendship. True friendship means you can get away with a lot more in a conversation. Like Lou and Jarch are a great example of it. And we always say you can't manufacture chemistry, but in radio we continually try to do it. Rather than they have chemistry, that's the show. And I recall shows that have, might be talent who are on another radio station or doing a podcast, and you'll just take one of them because they're the best one. We'll take that one and we'll put them with this person, when you should have taken both of them.
Because sometimes when you take them out of that dynamic, it dramatically changes, right? And we saw that, and this might not mean anything to anyone that's not a radio nerd or hasn't come from the industry, but I remember that even with the Shebang, which was a show that was on Triple M, in the 2000s, highly successful. It was Fifi Box, who's now on Fox FM Breakfast in Melbourne, Marty Sheargold, no longer in radio, and Byron Cook was what they call the anchor role. So his face wasn't necessarily on the billboards in the early stages, but he was the guy, he was kind of the glue between the two. And I remember him leaving the show, and I actually remember the commentary behind the scenes, and it was like, oh, it's not a big deal because he's not the star of the show. That show never was the same again. It missed it because you undervalued that relationship and the key roles that they play. You don't have to be the star of it. And to your point, yeah, commercial radio quite often will make that mistake. Oh, let's go and poach this talent, or let's just get that person. But what they miss is but what could that dynamic actually do? And we've seen it. How many times have you seen it that they join a different network and that just doesn't, it's not the same because you underestimated that connection behind the scenes and what that actually meant.
I feel like other people are having this conversation. That's why I'm hearing Lou and Jarch on the radio now. The other element is the tribalism that exists. They build their tribe. I went to an Alpha Blokes event. The Alpha Blokes are a really big podcast. These guys are doing extraordinarily well. And there's a guy that we both know who's working inside of that podcast, helping them out. And I remember him telling me, Corey, you need to come to one of their events. So I went to this event and it was insane, man. Now, radio events are free. These people paid to go to this event. It was a boxing night and they knew all of the podcasters up there. They were yelling out phrasing that the audience has actually come up with. It is tribal. It is passionate. It's actually what I recall radio used to be.
I think that's a great point. There's something to think about. Okay, well, what was radio doing in the 80s or 90s that built it? And it was great content. It was great listener engagement, both just from an interaction. So if you rang up, you would speak to the breakfast show. They were visibly seen out on the streets a lot more. And so the ability to build that bond and that relationship was far richer. And it does. It's lost art now. Like now, I mean, the intent of radio in most cases, unless you're a Kyle and Jackie O, which is kind of seen as they're up, the higher level. It's supposed to be you're somewhat just like me, but yet you're untouchable because the touch points with you are far less, and the way you view me as the listener and is not as rich as it once was. So you've lost that touch point, and you're right. That's what podcasts do so well. It's back to basics. It's around know your audience, care about your audience, interact with your audience, build that up,
and they take risks. They take risks that commercial radio, and to be fair, there's a reason for that. If you're on commercial radio, then you could have the newspapers writing about you the next day. And from a corporate point of view, from a shareholder point of view, no one wants bad news written about them. So it takes away your backbone to a degree. In the podcasting world, they don't have to worry about that because the more risks you take, the more authenticity the audience sees, which means it just brings you closer together. And that's the beauty of podcasting and commercial radio. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to change. So that's the wonderful thing we have. We actually have the opportunity for podcasters running the Wild West out in their environment, but then also, hey, collect a nice paycheck, build a different skill set, and have a mainstream audience. And you're seeing more and more of it. And I think it's really exciting. So let's stop pitting the two against each other because neither of them are perfect. You can find flaws and benefits and values in both, but the closer they can come together, the better. And if you're a podcaster and you don't like the commercial world, get out. You don't have to be there. It's all about choice. But pitting the two against each other, I'd rather see them working together, which I think they are. I hope it's just a noisy minority who are trying to create the divide between the two.
What I love about podcasting as well, and we've seen this a lot, mate, is podcasters will get around and support and build up other podcasts. See that in commercial radio. There's still this old mindset of it's us versus them. And scarily, that's even internally. It'll be, for example, a breakfast show against another show on the same network, as opposed to go, how do we actually go, well, we're all in this together, and as healthy as we can be together is better for our industry. And that has been such an amazing, refreshing thing to see in the podcasting world, to go, I know you've got your own podcast and you've got your own audience, but I'll happily have you on mine. And I'll help you out. No, I'll give yours a plug. That just doesn't happen in radio. And I think that's helping the podcast ecosystem build. It's confidence and it's we're in this together. And that's definitely become, look, I don't know if it was ever a great strength of commercial radio, but I think it's an opportunity for commercial radio to go, rather than fight each other, why don't we actually work together to make sure that our industry is as healthy as it can be?
I wonder if the barrier will ever be broken, because you're right, in podcasting world, they all jump on each other's shows and promote each other. I wonder if we'll ever get to a stage where you've got the shows actually interviewing and talking to each other. I used to love it when Kyle and Jack would call the other shows and have them on. Do you reckon Kyle and Jack lost any listeners because they had the Grill Team or WSFM or the Nova Show on their show?
Remember you and I tried to look at doing that when we were both running a Brisbane radio station? That cut down real quick.
I remember, without remembering the actual event itself, that was around Unity. So what better way to show unity than two opposing radio stations simulcasting with the same jocks and sharing a music log? Yeah, that was a while ago. I like to think that we're better, but that is a fundamental difference and such a great element and strength of podcasting. They get around each other. And maybe commercial radio will never get there, and it's again, because it's apples and oranges and there are similarities. Been enlightening to be in that kind of environment where, and at the moment, I'm reaching out to other podcasts to get our Blokes in Mining podcast on to, again, grow our audience and bring them on to their show as well. If they like what you're doing and they think you're a good person, they want to help you out.
It's not podcasting versus radio. It is podcasting and radio. Both have their strengths, both have their challenges, but let's not throw a blanket over one or the other and say one's better than the other, because their business models are different. Two should coexist, and we're seeing some really health movement between podcasters onto radio and vice versa, and then those doing exceptionally well in podcasts that will never do well in commercial radio and vice versa. And that's okay. What it is it's a great thing for content creators. It's a great thing for audience because you're spoilt for choice. And let that be you're looking for habitual listening on on your drive to work every day just because it feeds you familiarity. You can do that. If you're looking for something that you can put your headphones in and go to an escapism and listen to something for your 1 hour jog, then you can do that too. The both can coexist. They are coexisting. Both audiences are growing year on year. In particular, I'm talking here in Australia. That's a positive.
It's not about one killing the other. It's about knowing your lane, knowing your audience, and knowing your outcome. It's that simple.
So if you're a content creator, know that you're spoilt for choice. You can get into podcasting or explore opportunities in commercial radio. If you're a brand, an advertiser, how great is it that you've got options here? If you want mass appeal, you've got commercial radio. If you want to really narrow in on a niche audience, you can do that with advertising in the world of podcasting. There's great opportunity out there. And if you want to sort of help understand both sides of it, we can help that. We've got 30 years experience in commercial radio, and we've got many years of building great shows and content and working in the podcast space as well. You can reach out to us, thinkingcapsolutions.com.au. That's our website and where you can get us, or you can also get us at Thinking Cap Solutions, all one word, on LinkedIn.